The biggest single issue, although life's always a little bit more complicated than that, is the fact that people aren't saving enough. There are some people who are lucky enough to be in a very good employer-sponsored scheme, but there are millions and millions of people who either don't have access to a good employer scheme or do have access and sadly are not choosing to join it. But there are millions of people, particularly younger people, simply not saving for retirement.
The biggest issue, really, and it cuts across a whole lot of policy spheres, not only retirement incomes, is that we have to seriously, critically assess whether market provision is a proper way and a good way of providing welfare in late life. So we've seen pension income increasingly become marketised, individualised, individuals taking on the risk. We're seeing exactly the same thing in social care. We have housing issues with the reduction in the stock of social housing, and I doubt whether this kind of provision can provide the kind of socially just and equal society that a lot of us want to see. I think a critical role for academics over the next decade or the next 2 decades is going to be to properly assess the impact on inequality and social justice of the trend towards marketisation in all of these policy spheres.
I think the major issue is to improve gender equality of incomes in retirement, because at the moment women have much lower pensions than men do, and this is largely due to their domestic roles, which are essential roles, and in the private pensions part of their income they lose out badly because they don't get any credits for caring, and the state pensions are so low that women often find themselves on means-tested benefits or dependent on a husband in retirement.
I think the other key issue coming through, and never to be ignored, people retiring today at the 60 age, 65, the probability is they will be in retirement for 30 years. The last sort of firm consensual view on the statistics would be 28 years for women and 23 for men. But there's a lot of noise around the margin. Now, the point I'm trying to make is, in that long time, if we just say 25 years, I'd nearly ask you to sort of think back on what your salary was 25 years ago, because your pension, in the majority of cases, will not be inflation linked. And if you're having monies in, you're getting it in now, and it's not inflation linked, that will not increase for the next 20 years during your course in retirement. Middle class workers you wouldn't have thought would have gone into poverty, they're now looking at poverty.
Understanding that people live within families, they live with partners, they have adult children, they're deeply embedded in social relations. I think this is one of the second greatest challenges for the next 2 or 3 decades, because service delivery, financial services, government policy is increasingly aimed at individuals. We think of individuals as autonomous decision makers. And actually, as everybody knows, every single person knows, they're not. You have to take into account a whole lot of other people. You have to think about other people. I think we need to recognise this. So in the provision of social care, people need to understand they're not just dealing with the individual, they're dealing with the whole family, and they're dealing with often very troubled and problematic relationships. The provision of healthcare is exactly the same, and in the financial services industry, which of course we've been researching for the last couple of years. Decisions are almost never made by individuals alone. We have to incorporate that, and we have to think about the ethics of all of that as people age, as they have different kinds of problems in late life where they might have frailty or increasing cognitive impairment. I think we haven't really begun to think about how to cope professionally with considering people's social relations within the household.
Well, I think the most exciting plan that's been put forward is the plan for a universal pension, which you would qualify for if you had 30 years of contributional credits. That would be enormously helpful to women, and I hope that it happens. And that will also provide a good basis for any additional saving or earning that people want to do so that they can add to their income in retirement. And the other issue that's a major problem, actually, is that the government has decided that they will introduce the National Employee Savings Trust, and that is for additional savings for low-paid workers.
As I've understood it, the main reason for the government to introduce NEST, which is the National Employment Savings Trust, is to provide a scheme particularly for small employers who perhaps might struggle to choose or engage with the discussion about a pension scheme that they will need to enrol their employees into. And also from the perspective of employees on modest earnings, it's offering them a kind of low-cost, no-frills option, for want of a better word, given that there are limited options in the financial services world at the moment to meet the needs of people on modest incomes.
The most recent reforms, the reforms in 2008, have addressed some important problems with the systems, i.e. Poverty and undersaving, by raising the level of the state pension quite considerably and by bringing in employer compulsion, quasi-compulsion through NEST.
My problem with that is that because it's a private pension and it's reliant on the stock market, there are no credits for caring. And that means that, like other private pensions, it will discriminate against women who raise a family and need to take time out of employment. They will get lower pensions from the NEST pension, and that will perpetuate gender inequality in pension income. And I would have liked to see women allowed to opt out of that and into a state earnings-related pension with the same contributions as are proposed for the NEST. And I think they would find that a much more acceptable pension because it would be defined benefit, fully portable, cheap to administer, and would not rely on the risk of market failure, as every private pension does.
I think a concern generally with the workplace pension reforms is if people don't make active investment choices, what are the default funds that they will end up with, and what will be the likely outcomes for them, because we know from international experience that default funds can vary quite considerably in terms of the investments that money is put into and the consequent outcomes that people achieve in retirement.
I think where the problems now might lie is that because of the decline of defined benefits, closure first to new members, now probably we're going to see a wave of closure to existing members. It already has begun. Because of that and the changes in the public sector that they are now talking about, and it'll probably lead to, sort of a wholesale change in public sector generous defined benefit pensions. Because of these things, I think we are going to get a problem with the professionals, the middle class, previously quite well protected people, who are now have to make do with inferior benefits. So what you have, interestingly, in the liberal market economy, is that those at the bottom have made a step forward, while those sort of better protected middle classes are now less well protected. And we all know you can't run a welfare state without helping the middle classes. So what's going to happen next? I think that's where tension will and might come from.
I think There are several reasons why people don't save. Some people won't save because they work for employers that don't have a pension scheme. So if the employer doesn't have a pension scheme, then somehow in that workplace environment, you don't feel the opportunities there, and you probably feel it's quite a lot of effort to arrange something yourself. So sometimes sort of in that situation, inertia sets in and you think, well, I'll do it sometime. So you don't have the convenience of a pension scheme readily available at your place of work. Sometimes it's because people just think pensions are complicated and people put off complicated decisions. It all looks too much or too complicated. I'll do it tomorrow. I know I should do. And all I would say to people, actually, pensions aren't complicated. People want you to think they're complicated, but it is really about setting a certain amount of money aside each month, being saved for your pension. But read the paperwork that comes to you, have a look at it, and don't be bamboozled. So I think people sort of thinking, oh, it's too complicated, even if they've got an employer scheme, or I'll put it off till tomorrow. And certainly in some work I was involved in, when we went around the country talking to people, the most common response we got was, I'm not saving, I know I should be, I know it's good for me. Sometimes I wish somebody I would trust would just get on and do it for me. So a lot of people is, if just the administrative effort could be taken away from me and I could trust the people who are looking after my money, then I would do it. And then the third category is people who say, oh, I can't afford to save. And I sort of say, well, hang on, because you will grow old. There will obviously be some people who are very poor, for whom it will be difficult. But even then, I think they should pause and look, because there will be an employer contribution. Sometimes if they are on benefits or tax credit, some of that pension contribution will be heavily subsidised. So even they, I think, should pause, but obviously people at the end of the day will have to make the decision. One wouldn't want someone to go into debt and be paying off debt at very high interest rates, for example. But the vast majority of people, even on modest incomes, should save a little bit.
I think planning for the future involves a number of steps and stages. And really, it helps if people start when they're younger and start getting into the habit, the mindset of taking the opportunity to look at their lives, think about what they want, and then seek to create the next steps of their life. Now, we know somebody who's 15, 16, it's hard for them to envisage being 30, 40, impossible perhaps 50 or 60. However, if they started at 15, 16 with approaches, models, processes that they understood, it will be incorporated within their resilience strategies. And then they could, when they get into other phases of life, career choices at 15, 16, they can make those. They can readjust them, because nowadays people don't stay in the same job for the whole of their lives, like perhaps people who are 60 did. So when they get married or have children or their housing systems, they start planning again. And then when people get to pre-retirement, they've already built up a history of planning. So that would make a lot of sense. We need to know, what is the most important thing in our lives? What are our priorities? What are our values? What does our intuition tell us? And if we start there and we get that right, we can then create a life that's aligned to what we really want to achieve. What really turns me on? What really does it for me? And then once we've sorted out those things, then we can build a pattern that's going to work for us. If I'm doing things that don't fit with what I really want, I'm not going to be happy. I'm going to be bored. So I need to make a change so that my life comes back into alignment with the purpose I want, and create the things around me that are positive for me.